And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining our platform today, where we are elevating the cause of constitutional conservatism, bringing notice to good constitutional conservative candidates across the state of Louisiana, and slowly but surely draining the Louisiana swamp. My name is Chris.
And I'm Danielle, and this is the State of Freedom. Welcome, everybody. We are so thrilled that you're spending part of your day with us. You are the reason that we're here. We could not be doing this without your encouragement, your prayers, and your financial support. If you're looking for a way to support us, advertise with us, or send us feedback, please visit our website at freedomstate.us. And as you know, we are rapidly speeding toward Election Day. And you know that September 30th, early voting starts, but we are encouraging all State of Freedom listeners and your families to please make a plan to vote in person on Election Day. That's what the election integrity experts in our state are telling us is the best way to go. So please make a plan to do that. And as you might expect, we are continuing the endorsement series. We hope that you're enjoying it. We hope that you're sharing episodes with your friends and with family who live in the districts that we're covering, because as you well know, each and every candidate will affect the direction and the future of our state, whether they directly represent you or not. So as a reminder, you can send them short, punchy clips of these candidates from our YouTube and Rumble channels, and the links to those are in the show notes and over on freedomstate.us at the bottom of the screen. Today, we will be speaking with a candidate who has a high value for truth and integrity and leadership. We're so pleased to have Charles Marsala joining us today. He's running for state rep in District 94. But before you meet him, let me read the scripture of the day. Today's scripture is 1 John 2, verses 20 to 21. And it says, "But the Holy One has anointed you, and you all know the truth. So I'm writing to you not because you don't know the truth, but because you do know it, and no lie belongs to the truth." As I was reading that this morning, I was just reminded that the truth is our foundation, and truth is what leads us to freedom. Jesus told us that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can get to God the Father except through him. And as we live in this time where lies are more readily available to us than the truth, absolutely, it's essential that we stay close to the Lord and we ask him to help us discern the truth and not be deceived. But because Jesus sent us the Holy Spirit to guide us, we don't have to fear being deceived. We just have to stay connected to him because he is the truth and he's the source of all truth. So I hope that encourages you today and emboldens you to be one who continues to speak the truth and to point people to the truth. And don't be afraid of being deceived.
And no lie belongs to the truth. And you're so right, Danielle. There's so many different things coming at us, so many different sources of information. Sometimes it's difficult to know what's true and what's not, but the Holy Spirit does guide us and does help us to discern truth from falsehood, which is really the reason why we are having guests on the show so that they can come on and speak truthfully about their platform, about their vision. And today we're so blessed, as you said, to have Charles Marsala on with us, as you also said, running for state rep in District 94, which covers Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish. And Charles, I hope you are good this morning. Welcome aboard, sir.
Yes, thank you both. And I appreciate the scripture. The introduction is actually very unique. And I want to connect with something with you here. I first entered politics, I did it in high school, but that I'll talk about, at post high school here. I was in Atherton, California. I'm from New Orleans, went to Jesuit, and I got involved in the art committee. I was a wildlife photographer, got on the art committee. We were looking to build an art center. And then there were some issues going on in our town. I barely lived there. I decided to go to a city council meeting. 20 people were attacking the incumbent mayor and the vice mayor. They'd done great jobs. It's a non-paying position in our town. And I just thought somebody needs to say something nice about these people because they've really done a great job. I reached back to something Harry Thompson said to us at the Mass of the Holy Spirit. And that was at Jesuit. He said that there'll be times in your life where you have to say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." And as I listened to what your scripture was saying, I think it ties in so much as to where we are today, that there are times where we have to say, our back's up against the wall. And Father Thompson gave a great homily in the Mass of the Holy Spirit when he came out with those final words, "Here I am, Lord, send me," when there are times you have to stand up and fight something.
Wow.
That's part of how I got in this race. It was how I got in that day, because I'd only lived in the town 8 months. And I thought, I'm going to destroy myself politically in this town, but somebody needed to do it. And I got up from the back of the room, walked up to the microphone, and I got home, and the mayor called me. He was a World War II veteran. He'd been a captain of a ship. And he said, "Listen, I'm ready to retire. I've been doing this for 24 years. If you want it, I'll start training you."
Wow.
And that was how I got started in California. And here, there are times right now where I look at what's going on, and you have to suck it up and go to your spiritual strengths to continue the fight, against what we're up against.
You absolutely do.
Absolutely. Here I am, Lord, send me. What a classic scripture. And Father Harry Thompson, I had a chance to know him when I was in the Jesuit seminary, Charles, and what an icon of a man, and how blessed you were to know him and to be influenced by him. I think it's so interesting that one act of courage on your part in standing up for two people, and I gather you were probably the only one standing
I
up
was.
in defense of them, and then that led to to something great when the mayor called you. But that does say a lot about sort of who you are, as a person, going back many years. Why did you? I know that you are engaged fully in this race now, working very hard. Tell the listeners why you decided to make this decision. Fine. A lot of people think about running for office, go back and forth, and don't end up doing it. Why did you make the decision to pull the trigger and go ahead and run for this seat?
Well, I actually started about 5 months ago thinking about it, because I live now. Now you got to realize, like, again, I've been politically active since I was in seventh grade. And, I got elected to the treasurer of the class. And then in Jesuit, I was homeroom representative and then student council president. So it's something I've enjoyed. I'm not particularly athletic. So golfing or other sports were not something I was, as you know, Jesuit has a very competitive athletic program. So I found my niche to be certain other things. And one of them was student government. Then at California, I got involved, and we live here on the lake. And one of our big things that I learned is taking care of open space, the environment, and the importance of just our ecology. St. Francis Xavier I'm a big fan of his. And actually, I did a series on Laudato Si, which was the Pope's encyclical about how we need to take better care of the planet. I got involved making a TV show about how we need to do coastal restoration and other issues in our environment here in Louisiana. As things were evolving economically, I've been in Silicon Valley. So I'm also an engineer, and look at what's going on. And then suddenly things started evolving here, where the transparency, which is one of the key things in government that people want, is transparency. And the second is accountability, became missing. Our board was going to develop this area in a massive way. And that's when I found out that the rep, who's Stephanie Hilferty, had passed a bill 4 years ago to convert this park into a commercial development. And she's a commercial real estate agent. I just got her flyer yesterday in the mail, and she doesn't talk at all about developing the park. She talks about other things she's done, but she isn't owning the fact that she's made this development possible. And as I got involved, I was already going to Baton Rouge for other issues on seniors, finance, and many different things are hitting us. Crime, we need tax issues was reform. There's ideas I learned in California. And I thought it's time for me to step up and offer those ideas to the public and say, there's a better way to do things. And we need to look at those comprehensively.
Yeah.
So that's how I got involved.
Yeah. So in 2019, Charles, to drill down just a little bit, you're talking about legislation that your opponent, Stephanie Hilferty, authored that would allow the lease of a number of acres over there. I think it's bordering Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish for commercial development. And of course, she's a commercial realtor, which strikes us as a real, at least a potential, if not an actual conflict of interest that would seem to caution against her even participating in legislation like that, much less authoring it. But you noticed that, and that was one of the reasons that motivated you to decide to run against her.
Yes, it is. I mean, we have a pelican sanctuary, I say habitat here. We have eagles hanging out in it. The area was recreational till Hurricane Katrina, and then they put a pumping station here. We lost the volleyball courts, Coconut Beach. And when I surveyed, I used one of my neighbors in California was the founder of Survey Monkey. I created a detailed survey online, 55 questions, and 85 to 95% of the people answered all the questions saying they wanted to save the oak trees or they wanted recreation, they wanted a bike path. And yet, our board, which was just recently appointed by the New Orleans City Council, and Stephanie are pushing to convert this to commercial entities, like bars on the bottom floor and more office space on the top. And post COVID, which I think we can talk about later, is a situation where people are working from home. You got tremendous amounts of open office space, and we're going to build a facility here where we're going to look for federal money, which is the way Louisiana seems to operate, to get federal money to build this, and then you spread it around. And then the guy goes bankrupt, and we end up with a plaza shopping center, a jazz land, or an uptown village situation where it's a bankrupt facility, and the residents have to bear the brunt of the blight.
Yeah, after the people involved in it have taken the money and run. Yeah, that makes sense. And one of these things that just bothers us about it, again, it's the main thing that bothers us. You're not obviously against commercial development. You're a capitalist. You're an entrepreneur, and I know that you're for free enterprise. But there are certain areas that should be preserved and conserved and not developed commercially, and that's certainly a respectable position to have. But the thing that we find very troubling about Hilferty's involvement in the legislation on a broader level is that she stands to benefit from it as a commercial realtor, and that's the sort of transparency that you're talking about here. That's the kind of thing that should have been disclosed to her colleagues. And really, in fairness, and in order to avoid the entrance, even the appearance of impropriety, she shouldn't have even participated in the legislation, much less voted on it. And that's the real concern that we have. And again, going to your issue of transparency and accountability, it's an ethical consideration for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will add to that. Last week, Travis Mackle was supposed to have us both on Hot Seat. She declined to participate, so he canceled the show. So she is hiding her mailing. Nothing that she's doing right now says, hey, I got this legislation done so we can convert the park into a commercial development. And they actually are trying to say at times it's a redevelopment. Because you remember there used to be some restaurants that were actually outside the park, Fitzgerald's, which was gone for 25 years. All that stuff's been gone for 25 years. And they tried to slide it through that this is bringing it back. If it was, you wouldn't have needed any new legislation. You could have just rebuilt it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Okay.
You're so right.
And so when I see that, I just cringe. And then as we got into that, we opened up. Other people called me when I announced that I was running that Friday morning, saying, we're so glad you're running. I didn't realize some of the other things in her history that has made her not appealing to other Republicans and actually other people as well, Democrats as well. I've had the Democrat opponent approach me about trying to help me that she had 4 years ago and some other things. So it's been interesting to see what this led to, because it wasn't just me in a vacuum. It was other people having the same situation.
Well, that's awesome. And we are thrilled that you stood up to challenge Stephanie Hilferty. You might not know this, Charles, but we were targeting her after this session in particular, and we were praying and we're calling for someone to step up to the challenge. In fact, we dedicated an entire episode 48, to the horrors of her voting record, along with 2 other terrible Republicans. So when we saw your name on the qualifying list, we stood up and cheered, and we haven't stopped cheering since then.
I never thought, exactly right, Charles. I never thought we were going, God dog it, it looks like Hilferty's going to get away without an opponent. And then we saw your name. And even though I didn't know you, I never thought I would like the name Charles Marsala so much. When I saw that you had decided to make the run.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's interesting because, one of my other deals that I do here is I'm currently the president of the Italians of the whole Southeast. I mean, I go from Texas to Virginia, And I've had a great time. I've been doing that for 4 years, and I represent us at the national level. I even go to Rome sometimes for meetings. But as I got into this, I got an email not too long ago from a representative sister that lives in my district saying, I want to put up one of your yard signs. And then I happened to meet Ray and realized who Ray was. I've made some great friends on the Italian side as well, because the way that she handled the CRT issue.
Oh, wow.
And that was strange that a fellow Italian was the person that she had targeted in that situation.
Yeah, that the blowback on that is going to be pretty hard. I mean, I think it probably was at the time, but that's just not something people forget. The way that she handled herself in that situation, and I
Not at
think
all,
Chris,
Danielle.
we'll probably get into that a little bit more later. But just as a reminder for our listeners, I think Ray Garofalo, who we brought on a couple episodes ago, had authored some legislation, was bringing it forward to prohibit critical race theory from being taught in schools. And she berated him in the meeting and then went on national TV and just did a takedown of her colleague, which in my opinion is absolutely classless.
I heard they were looking at maybe even censure her for that, because I don't understand how you would go after a colleague. And as I watched that video, Ray was clearly saying, and then I read the whole history, that with the COVID relief money, we had to implement, they now call it social emotional learning, but it's really CRT. And that led to this whole takedown that she did of him to get, it seems like, national prestige.
Yeah.
And you're wondering why.
What is that getting you? Absolutely. 5 minutes of fame. I just thought it was classless and pathetic. But okay, so Charles, you have given us a taste of what separates you from your opponent, but do you want to maybe delve in a little bit more on what the distinction is between the two of you ideologically, philosophically?
Well, I will here say a couple of things that my platform, because I just don't want to be, it wasn't about the park alone. I'm not a one candidate issue candidate. When I looked at things 7-8 years ago, I did actually run for U.S. Senate for Louisiana, because I thought many of my issues were statewide. And again, having the TV show, we were spending time on these issues that I felt like at least we could bring them and maybe they would get to D.C. My mom had been addicted to prescription opioids, and she was in her 70s, and that was hell getting her off of those.
Wow.
And I didn't realize when I dealt with that we needed to deal with the opioid crisis. So 7 years ago, I got involved in that. My dad had been born in a depression, had worked, left his wife a house and about $500,000. So she was financially secure. But when she went into a nursing home, they said, you got to go through all your money and then we'll help you. And the lady next door, like the room next door, could have been broke and had the same treatment my mom was getting. And I said, well, what if she gets better and she won't have any money to take care of the house? That's not our problem. So I also got into it on senior finances. At the time, I had gotten all my financial licenses and was practicing. And then I decided that I was so angry that I jumped in the Senate race when that was an open seat. And I made some great friends. Actually, I think I'm here today because of the friendship I made with John Fleming during that race. He's a great man. And he and I became friends because we would be debating each other. I made friends with the independents, the Democrats. We had a great time in that campaign. And then right after that is when I got the call and offer to be the president of the Italians of the Southeast. So running, you can get things done, not necessarily always winning. And then often I found that sometimes you run the first time, which is when I ran for city council in California, I lost. And then I won the next year, 2 years later, the next time. So we got in this race. People are already hearing what we have to say. And one of the things that I brought out, and I think Stephanie's already adopted it, was that, I'm for school choice. We need to be doing that. The money, the people are struggling to get their kids to go to Jesuit or private school. Or I got a great friend whose daughter's got cerebral palsy and they're in a private school for special needs. Why not give back 60 to 80, 90% of what we're spending per student at the public school so the parent gets a voucher and can spend that. And I think Stephanie's already adopted that. She can't start out with that, but I think she's now saying she's for that. All right. And then I also no state income tax. We got to compete with Texas and Florida. I thought I could
Amen.
do it from
Amen.
a,
I
yes.
feel like standing up and
I
giving you
know.
a
High
round of
five.
applause. In fact, Charles, if we were on a video Zoom call, I would stand up and give you a round of applause on that one.
Thank you. Yes, because we're people. I was trying to recruit companies that I knew from Silicon Valley. They were going to India to do their call centers and other work. Why? And I thought Louisiana has some amazing and several great universities. So why couldn't those jobs come here?
Yeah.
But they go to Texas and they go to Florida. They skip over us, and we don't, until we put the infrastructure in place, they're not going to stop here. And I drive to Alabama, BMW, Mercedes. They're building amazing facilities in those places, and yet GM pulls out of Monroe and Shreveport.
Yeah.
So we have to
Yes.
redesign our situation here. So as a state rep, you need to also be thinking you represent your district, but you're dealing with state issues and having
We
covered
are.
the whole state for someone. Yes.
As you say, Charles, not to interrupt you, but it's important that I take note of a couple of the things that you've raised. You're talking here about education, and you're talking here about our tax structure. And I can tell you from having been at the legislature for 2 or 3 years now that I don't believe, at least I haven't seen any legislation that your opponent has authored to provide tax relief for Louisiana citizens. And I certainly have not seen her author or encourage legislation that elevates school choice in Louisiana. Neither one of those issues has she been out in front on. And yet they both seem to be very important issues to you.
Absolutely. And I looked at that in her record, 8 years, and I'm thinking, what this bill that obviously allows the development of this park is the only thing I can see that stands out that she got done. And she doesn't want to promote that. Her flyers right now are not advertising, hey, I got it arranged that we could put commercial offices in the park.
Yeah, it's not exactly shocking.
And then one other thing that I would stress is, when I tell people I was in California frequently, Louisianans might say, oh, I'm so sorry for you. But I was there during a period of manufacturing and it was really a good time in California. And I was mayor, fortunately, of a really amazing city in the Silicon Valley area. We had, thank God, Prop 13. So property taxes could only go up about 1 to 1.25% a year. And you buy your house, like I bought my house for $200,000. So that meant every year it could only go up $20, all right, 1%. And here we had in New Orleans, we just had this massive, excuse me, is that right? Maybe that's, I'm sorry, $200. I'm doing the math there. But here we have this recent 25% increase in valuations because of the inflation of printing all this money. So taxes are going up like crazy. And I think seniors are going to have a hard time keeping their houses with their new property tax bills. So we have to actually cap property taxes in Louisiana as well. And that's something
Yes,
I learned
indeed.
in California. Not everything in California is bad. There's some things that they were doing that are good. So that was one of the other parts of my platform that I wanted to do. And as far as legislation, I'm big on the environment. So when I came back here, a friend of mine asked me to look at saving elephants. And the reason why I tell you the story is when I looked at it, they were killing 100 elephants a day, ISIS was in Africa,
Yeah.
selling the ivory and making that to fund terrorism.
Absolutely.
So I wrote the bill and sent it to the Congress, the 40 members of the Judicial Committee, and they implemented it.
Wow.
So we made trafficking ivory a financial crime as opposed to a hunting violation. And now that they're only doing a third of the elephants are being killed a day that used to be 8-10 years ago, were being killed like in 2013. So it actually, you're writing a bill is something I like to do. I did that in California with some things. And here, I just don't see that she's put anything through of substance.
Well,
Yeah, and
Charles,
we've looked at it very closely.
yeah, and you hit a special place in my heart because I don't think you would have any reason to know this, but I spent 10, 15 years of my professional life traveling across Africa doing government affairs work there. And I spent significant time at some of the elephant orphanages and rhino orphanages where, the parents had been killed for their ivory and trafficking was just absolutely decimating the plains. And so, gosh, thank you for that. I really, really appreciate that. And what you're saying about the environment really strikes a chord with me as well, because I think that our state has been focused on the wrong things with the environment. And you may agree or disagree with me on this point, but we're putting all this legislation forward to promote carbon capture, I think ostensibly because there's federal money behind it, not necessarily because of the science. That's my perspective. But what about Highway 90 and the fact that it is completely littered when you are driving into Homa? It's just like we can't even get the basics under control, but here we are promoting some of these higher aspects of environmentalism, and it just the dissonance is, it just reeks to me.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Danielle, it's amazing because when I went down to tell the path of the elephant thing, I'm thinking they might. I don't know if you want to hear that or not. And when I tell some people, but it's great that we connected on that. And I think, did you go to? Was it the David Sheffield Wildlife Trust?
I spent probably I spent some time there in Kenya, and then probably also South Africa at the two elephant orphanages, I think.
Okay, because that was one that I got involved in. We actually worked with Billy Nungesser would loan us his elephant float, and we would parade with it in the crew of Tufts, handing
That's
out
awesome.
literature. I had 40 costumes made of elephants, and I got some fraternity guys from Tulane to do this as their community service work. But we walked the parade with them handing out information about saving elephants for a couple of years.
That's
We made a
so
video
cool.
about, and then we come to find out down Julia Street, there are numerous artists that numerous. I say like 6 that do paintings of elephants. So New Orleans actually has a group that was trying to bring attention to the situation through art and other forms, and it was really amazing to get connected worldwide with that movement to save rhinos and elephants, and some amazing, wonderful people I met to get it through. And it was actually a Republican congressman in Southern California that introduced the legislation, and it passed in 2016.
That's
So
awesome.
that was a
That
big
is
deal.
remarkable. One of the things that I'm picking up on here, Charles, the issues that you raise. It's interesting that your theoretical, your concern for these issues is not just theoretical. It's like the pattern is that you had an experience on an issue or a matter that directly affected you or your family, and so you became concerned, got involved, and did something about it. You're not engaged in running for office to advance yourself. It's these issues have affected you, your family, and others, and so your concern sort of has arisen organically to try to run and make a difference publicly. And I think that distinguishes you from so many of the people who are running for office and politicians who are seeking personal gain from it. I find that quite noteworthy.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, Chris. And I do want to add one thing, because Danielle mentioned Highway 90. Again, so when I was in California and they put me on this path to become mayor, it was a 6-year path, actually 8. I was on the art committee, and the mayor said, I got to get you some more serious assignments. So first became Park and Rec, and then it became finance. And in the middle of that, in Park and Rec was also waste reduction. So when Danielle said about the trash, we wrote a bill that the state adopted and said out statewide that we could recycle and divert 50% of our waste not going into landfills. And New Orleans right now doesn't recycle very, very little of all the glass bottles and the wine bottles go in landfills. That could be sand that could help restore the coast. So when I looked at all the ways we need to take care of restoring our coast and protecting things, which comes back to our insurance, if we could rebuild the coast, we could probably get lower insurance rates because the damage would be less severe from hurricanes. So we look at things, and it's like I said, I'm an engineer. Right now we have the saltwater intrusion. Yesterday I was on the phone with several of my friends who were engineers at my age or in management positions, and I'm calling them like, have you thought about this? And they're running me to other people because, with the $3 billion diversion that they want to do into Lafitte, is that going to lower the Mississippi River more? Are we spending all that money? That's more federal money. We're so happy to get it. We don't care what it does. We just want the $3 billion. And I'm getting feedback that diversion is not necessarily the best thing. So
Right.
Now with the saltwater deal, are we going to make it worse? We just don't even think about long-term anything in Louisiana. We just want federal money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah, and we don't seem to care what the conditions are. Or I try to tell people frequently that, look, the federal government is not just giving you money and attaching no conditions. Every dime that the federal government gives to the state of Louisiana comes with certain conditions attached to it and makes us more subservient to federal power. That's the way I look at it. It never comes without a cost, never comes without a condition. You're so right, Charles. People just look, oh, we want the money, and they don't really think about the long-term implications of it. Speaking of what, I'm going to shift gears for just a second here, Charles. Speaking of federal money and the conditions that are often attached to federal largesse, back in 2020 during the COVID lockdowns, we received a tremendous amount of federal money, but attached to that money was strong pressure and coercion to lock the state down, to impose mask mandates, social distancing, vaccine requirements, all the rest of it. And I think our state and many businesses are still suffering. Many businesses still haven't recovered from that lockdown. To distinguish you from your opponent again, and I want you to talk about this in a minute, your opponent, Stephanie Hilferty, did absolutely nothing in 2020 to help the conservative legislators get our state reopened and get people back to work. I mean, she did nothing. She basically did the bidding of the governor. And now we're hearing that there may be another lockdown coming. We don't know. We certainly hope that's not the case. What is your view about the emergency lockdown in 2020 that lasted month after month? And how would you respond now if something like that were to come down the pike again?
Well, and one of the things which is really neat in a way was Admiral Brett Giroir, who came up with the test kit. And you might have seen him in the Rose Garden showing it and how he's getting away from sticking it up to your brain, the swab. He was a classmate of mine at Jesuit for 5 years. And I've interviewed Brett on my TV show. So getting advice as to how to respond now, I have those contacts where Brett just came out with a book. We had an hour interview over what he learned and what went right and what went wrong during that period. And he resigned the day Joe Biden took office. And he hopes to come back with a Republican president in next year. So I learned that I tried to keep working. I mean, we had to. I have a TV show to produce, and I wasn't just going to fold everything I'd done. So I did get vaccinated. And then because I was interviewing a lot of World War II vets at the time, I drove Route 66 and found that some states were open, and then I would cross the state line and everything would be shut down. It was so crazy the way our country responded.
Yeah.
And we've seen that the states that stayed open are doing, didn't suffer the way we are suffering today. And Trump had said that we don't want the medicine, so to speak, to be worse than the virus. And in a way, for many states, it was worse than the virus. I did end up getting COVID, but I was only down for like 5 hours. I mean, I got it on a Saturday. I was doing some weeding, and I was kept weeding that afternoon, and had to isolate for 10 days. But I felt fine those next 10 days. And people talk about the immunity, and I had friends that didn't want to get the vaccine because they said that they were going to, reactions that they were having. So I felt like nobody talked about if you got natural immunity by catching the virus, if that was as effective as having a shot. That was a clear thing. And then the lockdown. Yes.
And Charles, it's interesting. You said that sometimes I love what you said a moment ago, that sometimes the medicine makes things worse. The medicine is supposed to cure. The solution is supposed to make things better. But it looks like in so many ways, the response and the solution that our government offered made things a lot worse.
Yes, it was. And then I had friends that were saying that these masks they were telling me that from day one. The guy does hazmat cleanup when they have hurricanes, and he's telling me that mask that they're telling you to wear, that won't do anything. That's a joke. Because if you really want a mask, you got to be wearing this, and otherwise don't even bother. And then now we're finding that out that was true.
Yeah.
So there was so many falsehoods that were coming out during that period, just seemingly as it was scary, like 1984, the book by Orwell, to control us.
Oh, wow. Orwell. Yeah.
Whether or not that was done really to win the election or not. I mean, you look at everything that happened, and it just that was one of the questions that was asked to us, and I was surprised. Here's another difference between Stephanie and I. We were at the Alliance for Good Government, and they asked the question, do you unequivocally accept the results of the 2020 election that Joe Biden won? And she quickly said yes.
Wow.
And I'm like, I got a ballot. I'm still listed on the voter rosters in California 12 years later. They mailed me a ballot to vote in California for that election. And
Yeah.
thinking, they
That
say
says
it
a
like,
lot.
yes. And then with the, we found that the Pew Institute said that 10 to 12% of the voter rosters are people that shouldn't be on them. And yet everybody is trying to say that there was no problems with this mail-in ballot election.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And we've heard that at least in Louisiana, it's up to 20%. and 20% is what people are saying kind of generally is the average across the states now, not just 10 to 12%, but 20% dirty voter rolls.
Well, and that 12% was 10 years ago. So I guess it kept
I guess
growing.
they've had time. Yeah, exactly. I know great grandma's still on there.
I know we got to be serious, but I'll tell a quick joke. One of my friends was telling me when he was a kid, that the call went in and his uncle grabs him and says, we got to go get so many votes. And they went out to the cemetery and they needed 20 votes. So they got the 20 names off the tombstones. All right. And then they keep walking and they keep going in the back of the cemetery. And he says, Uncle, why are we here? He says, well, the people in the back of the cemetery get to vote too.
Oh my goodness!
I think I've heard that one before. We're not going to have any discrimination here in the cemetery. I have noticed. It seems like all the dead people always seem to vote Democrat. They all seem to be philosophically aligned with the Democrats. I find that very interesting. But on a more serious note, we had heard on this issue, Charles, as Danielle alluded to, that there are hundreds of thousands of people on Louisiana's voter rolls now. The Secretary of State has admitted a couple of 100,000, and in all likelihood, it's far more than that, who are on the voter rolls and they're either dead or they've moved or they no longer live in the parish where they're registered, and it's a real problem that we have. So I applaud the fact that you didn't immediately jump up like your opponent did and immediately say, oh, yeah, Joe Biden won 100% fair and square. I think most Americans don't believe that. And so I know I certainly don't.
No, I can remember those circles. He couldn't fill up those giant circles during his campaign. So no, I have a heck of a time believing that he won.
Yeah, I do too. And actually, I have an office building that I own in Menlo Park, which is where Facebook is headquartered. And as you read things, Mark Zuckerberg, and we had some issues like this when I was involved out there, gave $300 million to an Obama nonprofit to target Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta, and Milwaukee to get those mailed-in ballots in. And Zuckerberg gets to write off the $300 million as a tax deduction. And it's really nonprofits should not be. You don't get that deduction. It's a political deal.
Exactly.
So that was clearly how it played out. And
that was just greasing the wheels, right? That wasn't getting out the vote. Let's be clear.
Correct.
No, that was greasing the wheels.
Yeah, it was getting people in place, like in Philadelphia, to go harvest all those ballots and make sure they got them in. Yes. Yeah,
exactly.
It was.
That's right.
And then that's like supposedly illegal as well. So, I mean, one of the things, why don't we have a bill that says if you haven't voted in 2 years, you're off the roster? I mean, they're just like just that simple that it should have been done. And there's things you look at. I didn't see so much stuff at the session that the bills weren't there to fix certain things that are happening. But yet, not to pick on Stephanie, but it's too easy, low hanging fruit. The one bill that she did get done this year was that if you went to St. Mary's Dominican High School, you can get a personalized license plate now.
Yeah.
That's moving the needle for the state.
Yeah.
It's how profoundly consequential for freedom and liberty. It's interesting, but I think the takeaway, and Danielle and I will get more in detail regarding her votes here in a little bit. But kind of the takeaway right now is that she really has not done anything of any consequence except things that hurt us. She's not done anything of consequence that helps us or that helps conservative citizens in Louisiana. Let me ask you this, Charles, as you campaign, move around, talking to different people. What are you hearing from your voters over there in Jefferson, and what are they telling you are their main concerns?
So the first, I went to spoke at the NAACP event in the Treme, and it's really not the district, but it's close enough. And she didn't show for that. The questions I got there were insurance. What are you going to do about insurance? And that set the stage for what was going to be the biggest topics is insurance. And I'm looking at the situation now. I live over the water. I live outside the flood wall, protection wall in New Orleans. So I pay tremendous amounts. And, maybe we have to look at things like they are doing the roof, the fortified roof. I heard a presentation on that. Does it almost like if you do certain things like the good driver discount, are there ways that you could fortify your house so that you could start, they would have to give you discounts because living here, I have all my appliances and everything on the second floor. Chances of me flooding are really slim to none. So do I need to be buying insurance for appliances that are 12 feet in the air? But they just look at where you are. Do they look at what you've done to fortify your place so the roof won't get blown off and all that would flood? So those things I think we have to look at on insurance. That's a big deal. And Stephanie came out and said, I'm going to say she had the idea that she's going to say citizens insurance has to be the same as the people in the state. And that was her way of saying I'm going to lower your rates 10%. But as a businessman, I know that if I was writing insurance, I would not be in the state if I'm competing with the state. So exactly. The government, Louisiana government, makes no sense as a solution. We're going to have to do other things to get the state in. And we also have to realize that now the damages are so high valued because we have so many items in our houses and the cost to build has gone up so much that insurance rates have gone up because when we do have the storms, the companies have to write big checks and blaming them and making massive profits. I don't think that's a solution. I've known people that tell me how big the checks were that they got from the insurance companies. So it makes sense. If they could make money here, they'd be here still. They have these bills. Yeah. So we have to work with that to minimize their insurance companies' risk to being here to lure them in. Otherwise, we are going to be all depending on citizens, and then the state's going to be having problems with that. Another issue was crime. And backing up to this whole West End deal, I mean, Joe Giarruso's tied into this as well. And he's promoting on his website that he's going to make it like a Bourbon Street West out here. Well, to get here, yes. I mean, there was a month ago, there was a high-powered shooting on veterans at Fleur de Lis, 70 casings. Some of the bullets went into people's houses. 4:30 in the morning, two cars ran in each other that apparently weren't friends. And two people were shot, and they opened up firepower with these high-powered rifles. So if we make another Bourbon Street with New Orleans' crime problems, we've had a little bit of problems out here, a boat stolen here. Actually, my car was stolen a year and a half ago. If you start putting a Bourbon Street scene out here with all the fentanyl and everything else, you're doing what I call in tennis an unforced error. You're making a crime place where people are going to be driving through the district to get to here from Lake Shore, from Lakeview, from Bucktown, from Metairie, and then they'll be stopping in those neighborhoods, maybe having those gunfights. And her desire to make this commercial seems to me, again, we're not thinking, it's like building an airport with no access road. We're not thinking about what the engineering of it. When you do an engineering thing, you have to think the whole thing through. And the end result is like talking about Highway 90. They took the $300 million to build that flyover from other projects in the state because they had to build it, and suddenly they had to front load that. So everything else, Highway Interstate 49 or other things, got put back to build this access road. So those are things that I'm hearing. Jobs is one. I met with a guy yesterday. He says, well, you're an engineer. You're talking about high-end jobs. I said, no, a call center. We have call centers down here. We have call centers throughout the state, and we've lost those. We can't even keep a call center in Louisiana right now.
Unbelievable.
Instead of them going to, yeah, instead of those being in India, why aren't those companies in America? Or, why isn't Louisiana saying, let's market to those people? Let's
Yeah.
figure out
Yeah.
what the colleges need to be teaching so that you can get out, and get a job at a call center, doing tech support, or doing, collections, or whatever needs to be done. We have throughout the state so many universities. That was another topic. So those were the three that I was hearing.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And you've touched on this a little bit, Charles, but the role of state rep, you've talked about serving kind of your whole entire life. You've served the public in some way. But tell us how you would use your position as state rep to work for the people, and how would you position yourself to extend and protect our personal liberties?
Well, as far as some of the things with actually, this is one area we talked about with the CRT situation. I got to go back and throw in 7 years ago when Mitch Landrieu started taking down the monuments. And now we're dealing with Columbus Day being removed, and I'm big with the Italian community. I actually thought if you take him, to me, I wrote a book called Monumental Heist: A Story of Race, a Race to the White House. And I was trying to get in front of critical race theory. So what I see going on here is that our liberties with forcing CRT in the schools, because you put the money there and you say, you got to do this at the federal level. I mean, we've got to push back on a lot of those issues. And like just what Ray was doing, as I watched all of that, the book I wrote is 38 chapters. It could almost be a textbook. It's 700 pages showing the whole history of slavery going back, really goes back to about 600 AD. And then it tries to explain a lot of details, and it covers all the other issues we got going on. So with our liberties, we can't be indoctrinated. I mean, that's a big thing we have to fight on, is that to saving the minds of the youth from what people in DC want to tell them is the correct thing.
Yeah.
I did
Yeah.
get endorsed, and I did get endorsed by the Louisiana Shooters Association, the Shooting Association. The NRA gave me an A. They gave her a D. Clearly is a liberty there.
Mm-hmm.
With speech, one of the things that I've just done here is I filed a public records request to obtain the documents of our harbor, and the harbor master, the head of the board, said, Mr. Marsala shouldn't be emailing us asking you for information. That's freedom of information. That's freedom of speech to send an email to somebody saying, "Hey, what are you planning on doing?"
Yeah.
We
Exactly.
have to realize, some of these
Yeah.
liberties that we think are so been having for centuries are at risk, because the government's going to tell us, no, I don't have, you can't even email me to ask me a question.
Isn't that absolutely amazing? Maybe you should email her the text of the First Amendment.
Yeah, exactly. And then I did present this at the Alliance for Good Government, something that we have in New Orleans, which is another reason why I got in this race. In California, and I would run the meetings as mayor, the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting, we had public comments. And if people didn't like what I was doing, they could talk, they could bring 20 of their friends and
Yeah.
berate me. And that's how I got involved, that's what was going on. And at the end of watching those 20 people, I stood up and said, hey, he's actually a good guy. So in New Orleans, in the Louisiana state law, does not require a governing body to allow for public comments. It's only if you're going to vote on an item, and only on that item when you're going to vote on it. So if the
That's
government entity
abominable.
doesn't want to talk about it, yeah, it is. It is. So I've been there to the state legislature. I went about 3-4 years ago, and something unrelated, just to make it a video and be on tape where I'm at the legislative session, taking my 2 minutes to say, hey guys, you really need to change this. And I've written them, I don't hear back from them. So one of the things that I would put in place in Louisiana and introduce that bill is that you're going to have public comments on your agenda, that your open meeting law requires the public to be allowed to speak for things not on the agenda. I just can't believe
Amen.
that that's the way we're at.
That's
So
music to
very,
our
so very
ears.
important. Yes, indeed. It is music to our ears, and you would be very much aligned with Beryl Amade on that, state rep from Danielle's area, who has fought very, very hard for transparency and open meetings and things like that in the legislature. So you'd be a very good ally to her. It's amazing to me, Charles, that that the government that is supposed to be accountable to us and really derives their power from us would try to shut down people's right to speak. It just is. It's so backwards. And I find it quite frightening. And you're right. Some of these basic rights that we have taken for granted for so long are very much at risk. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that we are accepting so much of this federal money. And where the federal government can rain largesse on you, they can also create conditions for that largesse. And unfortunately, some of the conditions that they've imposed on us fly directly in the face of our basic freedoms and our basic liberties. And it's very gratifying that you know that and you've seen that.
It certainly does. And I'd also like to add to that, and maybe Charles, you can put this on your list, but maybe once you're in the state legislature, you can author legislation that reminds the federal government that that money comes from the citizens of Louisiana as well as citizens across the country, and we will not be dictated to any longer.
Yes.
I totally agree with that. Amen on that. Yet, and one of the things with my TV show that I tried to do, what I learned again when I was in California was I call it social philanthropy. Other people use that word. I'm taking it from other people. But the purpose of our show became to be showing how if you let people, maybe it's ego, but there's nothing wrong with that. Like Andrew Carnegie donated all that money to libraries. And if you look across our universities, you'll see people's names on buildings. And if somebody says, I'm going to make a ton of money and donate it to LSU or like the Taylor Foundation, I want to educate kids, they are motivated. If you let them keep the money, it stays in your state and it goes straight to what that gentleman or woman wanted to do with the money. Rather than you send it to DC and they build a building and they hire people and they pay them retirement to look at the money and send about half of it back.
Yeah, and you could say the same about Baton Rouge. You could say the same about the money that goes to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, so I mean, we tried to focus on people that are raising money. January, we focus, it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we look at people who are raising money like Covenant and taking care of places like Covenant House, and there's some other safe houses across the region here.
That's
Most
awesome.
of them are actually privately known because they don't want the pimps to be able to track down the girls that they're rescued, and they're trying to help these girls emotionally rebuild and then get their GED so they can get back and have a regular life. So, but I look at the people that were raising that money, and November we will honor veterans and the groups that do things for our veterans. One group has fishing charter boats, and the fishermen say, we'll take veterans out on our boats. Well, then this group said, but we now raise money to have a house, for them to stay in the night before they go fishing in Grand Isle.
Oh,
so then you got people
cool.
that are, isn't it? And you meet these people, and that's how we used to be as a country.
Yeah.
We used to rely on people donating directly to the nonprofit to do something good, rather than thinking it's better to send it to Baton Rouge or DC and have them skim off the top and send something back.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. And it seems like most things that the government is involved in, they screw up, and again, they create conditions for the use of that money. And it's not a good situation at all. I feel like, Charles, we could talk to you about these issues and more for a long, long time. But I want to ask you this. How are things looking out there? First of all, I'm sure you're getting a good reception. It sounds like you are. How are things looking for the rest of the race? And how can people get in touch with you, donate to your campaign, and learn more about you?
Well, thank you, Chris and Danielle, for the interview here. And it's been a good couple of weeks. It was great getting some of the endorsements. I think today or tomorrow there's going to be a story in the paper. They've interviewed both of us. I don't have the funding that she has, but we do have people that have known me because of the different organizations I'm in. So we have momentum. And as word gets out and people know more about the bill that she did, the reception is strong because people don't want a commercial development in a park. I mean, that's ridiculous. Especially we've lost 20 pelican colonies in the state, and here we have one, and we're going to destroy it. And we're spending millions to try to save what we have. So the response has been great to the message. My website is Marsala, FORLA.com, marsalaforla.com. And there's a link there that will take you to my YouTube channel, which has been up for 8 years. Charles Marsala, Join the Smarter Conversation, because we've talked about a lot of issues here, and I have playlists on many of those issues: pensions, opioids, senior savings, and other issues we're talking about, so people could hear. And the podcast link that we've just done, I'll have on my YouTube channel as well.
Great.
JP Morrell interviewed me. That's a 20-minute interview. I've been with Jeff Correa. That interview's up there. So there's interviews where people can see me to learn more, or watch this. And then to donate, there's a link there where you can donate to the campaign. It's a lot of work because she's an incumbent and she got a couple of, politically here, that's the way it works with some endorsements. But the other part is also a strong showing. Even if I don't win right now, the people you're talking about, meeting Ray, will allow us to get the legislation done. So I don't necessarily, if we can accomplish the legislation, I don't have to be the guy in office. She gets termed out. This might be the beginning of something that's a 4-year process for the seat. But also, if we can get some of this implemented, and maybe I talk to Beryl or talk to Ray about what we're trying to do, it might help us get the legislation done around her.
Well, I love that it's not an ego thing for you, Charles, but we want you in there.
I am running to win. I do want to say that. I'm not trying to say that, but thank you. I am running to win. I mean, clearly, I would love to get in and get all this done. I mean, I've been fighting some of it 8 years here, and it's like beating your head against the wall. Hey, when are you guys going to realize what we need to do to bring business here? All right. And I ran because I got tired of going places and waiting all day for 2 minutes to talk. I want to be the person that can talk unlimited on the dais and just get it done.
And it sounds like you will have the ability to get in there and hit the ground running. And we think that you can win, and we encourage you to keep working hard. We support you here 100%. I continue to believe, Charles, that if the voters in your district know on election day exactly what Stephanie Hilferty has done in the legislature, how she has voted on items of critical importance or not shown up to vote at all, her chances of winning are very slim. The challenge is to make sure the voters are aware of that on election day. And if they are, I think you're going to be in good stead. Thank you so much for joining us today, Charles. It's been a pleasure. And keep us in the loop on how things are going. And God bless you, sir.
Thank you both. Thank you both.
Thanks,
God bless
Charles.
You both too.
Have a great day.
All right. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Chris, I really, really appreciate that. I mean, Charles does not shy away from the tough issues. He's hit some hard ones. He's got his start on hard ones: opioids, senior pensions. I love the fact that he is solutions oriented, and not just solutions oriented in words, but he's action oriented and he's a doer. This is the kind of guy, the kind of energy, the kind of ideas that we need at the state legislature.
Absolutely. He just strikes me as someone who, again, very similar to Steven Schreiber, who has thought deeply about these issues and really understands them, has a command of the issues, and not just speaking on a superficial level about them. And the other thing that strikes me in his comments is that his opponent has done nothing on any of them. Nothing. I mean, what did she do? She got the personalized license plates done. It's like, where are you on these issues? We just haven't seen the leadership. And on the issues many of the issues that matter, not only has she not led on our behalf, she's actually worked against us.
Yeah. And I think we can kind of do a quick survey of some of those things. But just maybe as a starting place, I think we have to hit again, Chris, this conflict of interest in the legislation that she brought in 2019 for that park that Charles was talking about.
Several acres that she brought legislation to have developed commercially, leased by the state, and she is herself a commercial realtor. It's not hard to see the conflict of interest in authoring that legislation because she stands to benefit directly from it. Now, regardless of how you feel about whether or not this area should be developed commercially, people can disagree on that respectfully. But uh, there's no getting around the conflict of interest there. And I think that that should be pointed out. And as Charles said earlier, it's not something that she's bringing up attention to on the campaign trail. And it's easy to see why.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, you know, what I can say about as we prepped for today's show and kind of reminded ourselves of her voting record, there's a character issue here that I have a huge problem with. So, just a couple of things that we saw were she was part of that gang of 23 that went against their own word and got Clay Shake Snyder to be Speaker of the House in partnership with the Democrats. She did nothing to support us during the COVID lockdowns. And the way that she went on TV and blasted Ray Garofalo, who our listeners can now attest to for themselves, that he is an upstanding, honest, salt of the earth man who obviously did not deserve to be treated with such contempt on national TV. So, I mean, those three things alone kind of speak to me volumes about the character of this candidate.
No question about it, and I couldn't have said it any better myself. And specifically with regard to Ray Garofalo, I mean, she goes on CNN and leaves the viewers with the impression that her colleague, Republican Ray Garofalo, is some kind of a racist, which is not only false, it's malicious, it's defamatory, and just really, really reprehensible
In the name of self-promotion.
in the name of self promotion. That's very well said. For doing what? For bringing some legislation to try to prohibit the teaching in our schools that the United States Constitution is, in our country, are systemically racist and sexist. That's what he was doing. That makes him a racist. It really is very objectionable that she would do that. And of course, there's a lot more too.
There is a lot more, and maybe Chris, you can run through some of the legislation that we were thinking through before this. There's so many bills that there's no way we can really get into depth in all of them. And plus we have in episode 48 probably gotten into a little more depth than we will get into today, but I think it absolutely bears mentioning and bears reminding our listeners just how she voted and the critical negative impact she's had on our state as a voting member or non-voting member in the legislature.
Yes, and I'm going to, because there are so many, I'm going to have to run through these quickly. Fortunately, we've covered many of these in depth in other episodes, but I want to go through them quickly. 2021, Stephanie Hilferty helped to kill in committee a bill that would prohibit biological men from competing against women in competitive sports. She helped to kill that bill in committee. In 2022, Representative McCormick's concealed carry legislation, perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment, preserving our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. She was one of three Republicans to vote against that legislation on the House floor, even though it passed. And then, of course, as we know, it went into the Senate committee, the Senate Revenue Committee, where Patrick Connick was instrumental in killing that important Second Amendment legislation. I know he's not the subject of this show today, but it's worth mentioning because he is running for reelection. Also, a concealed carry in 2023, another bill by Representative McCormick that Representative Hilferty didn't even show up for the final vote on the House floor on a very significant and important Second Amendment bill.
And we're going to see a pattern of that, won't we?
Yes, and we're continuing to see a pattern. Also, this past session, Kathy Edmonston, two items of legislation. One requiring the Department of Education to notify citizens of their right to exempt from experimental vaccines. And the other one would have prohibited the government from ever being able to impose mandatory experimental COVID shots on students in Louisiana. She was absent for both of those votes in the regular session. And where are you on such important legislation? I mean, you're in a legislative session voting or supposed to be voting on hugely important legislation, and she doesn't show up for either one of those votes.
Yeah, I think it's by design. All I can say is maybe it's not, but the pattern suggests to me that it's by design because we've seen it from other members. We've seen it from other members whose names I won't raise in this context. But this pattern to me says I'm trying to kill legislation without getting on the voting record to my constituents that I am voting against their interests. That's what it says to me.
That's what it says, and that's really what you just said is affirmed by the fact that in the veto override session this year, she voted in favor. She switched. She was absent in the regular session, and then she comes in the veto override session where the spotlight is higher, knowing that she's running for reelection, and votes in favor. So it's arguable that she really doesn't even have the courage of her own convictions on some of these things because of these flip flops. There's another one I have to tell you about. This was Dodie Horton's legislation this past session that prohibits or would have prohibited sexually graphic and inappropriate topics from being broached or initiated by school administrators to minor school students. It's unfortunate that we have to have legislation like this, but that's the world we live in. It was a good piece of legislation. Stephanie Hilferty votes against it in the regular session and also votes against it in the veto override session, where it failed by 2 votes. And so she was 50% of the reason why this important legislation failed in the veto override session. And interestingly, Danielle, in 2022, there was a very similar bill that Dodie Horton brought that Stephanie Hilferty helped to kill in the Education Committee. So in 2022, it didn't even make it out of committee because of Stephanie Hilferty. And in 2023, she helped to kill it in the veto override session.
It boggles the
is,
mind. It boggles
it
the
does.
mind that someone would vote against this. And what does it say? It says, I think we've mentioned this before, but it says either a very elitist, my kids don't go to those schools, so I don't care. Or it says, I think the state and the people who are employed by the state are better positioned than the parents to have these very personal discussions, inappropriate, I think, by these administrators and teachers, but the vote says that that's more appropriate. That's who should be indoctrinating the children, and I just can't tolerate it.
Absolutely, and in a number of these bills that we're talking about here, Danielle, these are issues that most Republicans and many Democrats would agree on.
Absolutely.
These are not really partisan issues. These are issues just of basic judgment and basic decency. I'll give
Yeah.
you another example in 2023. Representative Cruz's pronoun bill. It was a simple piece of legislation that said, unless a parent of a minor consents, no school administrator can refer to any student by any pronoun other than what's on their biological birth certificate. Again, sad that we need legislation like this, but we do. And of course, she voted against it in the veto override session, where it fell 3 votes short. So she was a third of the reason why it failed in the veto override session. Our land sovereignty in Louisiana in 2023, Valerie Hodges' legislation prohibiting our foreign enemies, State Department listed sworn enemies, from buying land in Louisiana. Hugely important piece of legislation, and she's absent for the vote. Doesn't show up for the vote. She was also absent for Michael Echols' legislation that would have prohibited our foreign enemies from purchasing agricultural land in the state of Louisiana. She was absent for the vote in the regular session. What are you doing that is so important that causes you not to be present to vote on this legislation? I don't understand it, particularly when she can show up in committee and vote to kill a bill that would repeal. I don't know if you know this right now, Danielle, but in Louisiana, private corporations, as a matter of public policy, this is very scary, have the right through eminent domain to seize private property for carbon capture sequestration, to transport and store carbon capture on private property through eminent domain. Well, Sherman Mack, the good conservative, now retiring legislator, brought a bill to repeal that because it's an assault on private property and people's ability to control and regulate their own property. Well, she voted to kill that legislation in the Natural Resources Committee in 2023. So she showed up for that one. And she also voted in the Natural Resources Committee to kill a bill that would simply allow local governing authorities to make the determination about whether or not they have carbon capture in their parishes. It would have returned the authority to local governments. Well, she voted to kill that in the Natural Resources Committee. So these two very important items of legislation regarding local government and the supremacy of private property, Stephanie Hilferty sought to and succeeded in killing in committee in 2023.
And Chris, I can't let the time go by without just mentioning that Senator Sharon Hewitt is the reason that we have this private property eminent domain for carbon capture law on the books in the first place. She's running for governor. Just let that tell you what she's going to be as governor.
It is absolutely worth noting, and at the top of our agenda, Danielle, in 2024 legislative session will be to repeal that eminent domain provision for private corporations and to return the authority to make these carbon capture decisions to local governments. That is so very important that we do that. And we would be remiss, of course, if we did not remind our listeners that Stephanie Hilferty voted in the legislature to bust the constitutionally approved spending cap so that our legislators and those to whom they are beholden can squander billions more of our taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, no respect for taxpayer money, no respect for the will of her constituents. I just have a real hard time with this voting record, and I'm just so thrilled and encouraged by Charles Marsala's candidacy. I really believe he's the right man for the job. I think he's got the will, the energy, and the leadership skills to do it. I think he's got a great mind to see things through. Chris, one of the main things that has been a consistent theme across this show has been the short-sightedness, whether by design or just by greed. I mean, there's so many reasons that our state has been operating in a short-term mentality, but he has the mind to think through the next step and the next step and what is the bigger picture. And I think we need that right now. We have been living death by 1,000 cuts of short-term planning.
Because of people like Stephanie Hilferty in our legislature. You're so right. Charles talked about education and school choice. He talked about protecting the environment. He talked about crime. He talked about our tax structure. He has an understanding of all of it. And I believe, as I told him, we'll be in a position to hit the ground running and really lead on these issues. And not to in any way discredit Charles, but there are, because he is a fine candidate, but I can think of very few people who I would not vote for as opposed to Stephanie Hilferty at this point, because Danielle, this voting record is an absolute train wreck. And when you put that, when you put on top of that the idea that she would go on national television and disparage a Republican colleague who she knows is not a racist, who she knows is a very good man, just adds insult to injury here. And it would be a cause for great celebration is if she is involuntarily resigned from the state legislature either in October or November of this year.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I will be very upfront about celebrating that. So we're very, very hopeful. Just a reminder to the listeners, if you want to support candidates like Charles Marsala and others, you can do that by supporting the LaCag PAC. That's at www.lacag.org. And Chris, would you mind giving the P.O. box?
LaCag PAC, that's LACAG PAC, P.O. Box 64952, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 70896. And we are devoting resources and time, effort, and energy to making sure that these good constitutional conservative candidates are able to get their message out effectively so that they can secure victory and return our legislature to the people. And of course, we continue to thank all of you for donating to the LeCag PAC and of course to the State of Freedom, which is rapidly expanding across the state, Danielle.
It is. And a reminder to folks, you can get in touch with us or support us or find out more about advertising at freedomstate.us.
And as we go forward each day, Danielle, I feel it in my bones. I feel the momentum is picking up. I think the pendulum is swinging back. The citizens of Louisiana are prepared to retake our legislature for the citizenry so that we can have a government in our state that once again is truly accountable to the people. And to that end, each day we go forward and take another step to preserve the state of freedom in Louisiana.
Let's go forward.
Amen.
Thanks for listening to the State of Freedom. To stay on top of all the calls to action we mentioned today, just check out the show notes for the episode. If you'd like to support the show financially, visit our website at freedomstate.us. If you'd prefer to give by mail, you can send a check to the State of Freedom, LLC at P.O. Box 861, Berg, Louisiana 70343. If you own a business in Louisiana and are interested in supporting our show by advertising, please email us at info@freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org, LACAG.org, or email Chris at chris@lacag.org. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe and share it. Give us a 5-star rating in the reviews. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.